What I thought I would do is just share with you some of the research that I've been doing over the last several years, looking at the enablers and obstacles to success for underrepresented individuals and organizations, with a particular focus on the Black experience. And so as I go through this, let me just tell you a bit about the inspiration for this work. So this work that I'm going to present to you today is really focused on the 50th anniversary celebration of the African American Student Union. That was our inspiration. So in 2018, that marked the 50th anniversary of the formation of AESU. And these five individuals, this was their class picture in 1968, these five individuals formed that African American Student Union, including Lillian Lincoln Lambert, who was the first Black woman to graduate from Harvard Business School in 1969. And so their efforts really focused on increasing the number of people of color in the MBA program, particularly a number of Blacks in the MBA program, increasing the case diversity in our programs, and increasing the faculty and staff of color at Harvard Business School. And so their work and their legacy has carried on, and we wanted to mark that 2018 celebration. But as part of that, I really wanted to do a deep dive into the experiences of our Black MBAs. And so that the motivating question I had was, what can we learn about the career paths and perspectives of MBAs? And this came from earlier work that I had done with our former dean, Nithin Noria, on this book called Paths to Power. So we wrote this book on Paths to Power, and this was really an in-depth look at whether the United States is a land of opportunity, this sort of rags to riches story that we like to tell, that anybody with pluck and drive and determination can succeed in the United States. Is that really a myth, or is that reality? And largely it's a myth. And because we celebrate these larger than life figures, in a way, it seems that it's more possible than it actually is. And so we did a deep dive into race, gender, social class, religion, ethnicity, to really try to understand what was the path of insiders and what was the path of outsiders. And there was clearly two different paths. So if you were a woman, if you were a person of color, your path was an outside path. There were very few opportunities for success in the 20th century in the traditional corporate establishment. And so what we ended up finding is that there were four paths to power for outsiders. One path was place. And what we meant by place was that many individual outsiders on the list ended up creating businesses for people like themselves. So women creating businesses for women, Blacks creating businesses for Blacks. You stayed in your community, you created an opportunity there, and potentially it expanded out. And so place was one way that you could gain success as an outsider, by serving a particular community. The second was personal network. So having these connections, having these mentors, having these sponsors, having these individuals who can support you along the way was critically important for outsiders, people who had their back. The third was professional credentials. So what we saw on our list of great business leaders as we looked over a 100-year period in the 20th century was that the women, the people of color, were far more educated than their white counterparts, than their white male counterparts. And partly that was because of this need to gain access and legitimacy as an outsider. Sometimes professional credentials gave you that added lift, that added legitimacy that you needed. And the fourth was perseverance. So every Black woman on our list of great business leaders, as we did this survey in Paths to Power, was a founder. So there was no other traditional path to reach the top in the 20th century. And so we wanted to really understand today, if our Black MBAs, are they more like outsiders or are they more like insiders? So if you think about coming to Harvard Business School, it's the insider's inside path, right? This is the ticket that you have to success. And a lot of times we talk about Harvard Business School as being a transformational experience. And I really wanted to understand, do our Black MBAs have experiences that are similar to insiders, because this is the insider's inside path, or are they more similar to outsiders? And so that's what really was motivating the question, was trying to understand what we can learn about our Black MBAs. And so to be able to do that, I ended up having to build a database of Black MBAs. And you might think that that would be relatively easy, but when I went to our alumni relations office and said, hey, can you give me a list of all of our Black MBAs? They could not. We did not capture that information until 1996. And so prior to 1996, we didn't have any records of, any official records of our Black MBAs. And so through a painstaking process over about 12 to 18 months, we were able to pull together archival information and we were able to build a data set of all of our, I won't say all because I'm sure we missed some, but with I think 95, 96% certainty, a data set of our Black MBAs from the beginning of the school's establishment in 1908 to the present day. And for the last 40 years of those graduates, we decided to append all of the job history that we could find, where they went to school, where they worked, how they advanced in their careers, all of those different demographic variables. We did a series of satisfaction surveys and in-depth interviews and focus groups. And I'm going to share with you some of the quotes and some of the thoughts of the individuals that we interviewed as I go along with this presentation. And so all of this resulted in alumni about 2,300. We can say with relative certainty that there have been 2,300 alumni of Harvard Business School, Black alumni. And when I mean Black, I mean both African-American US citizens and Blacks from across the world, Africa, South America, Caribbean, et cetera. And so about 2,300, and of those 2,300 alumni, which represents a little less than 4% of total alumni of Harvard Business School, for the ones from 1977 to 2015, there were 1,821, and that is the group that I centered the research on, looking at the last 40 years or so. And of that group, we were able to get full employment history on over 75%. So this is one of the largest databases of Black professionals that has ever been built. We're looking at about almost 1,400 records there. To give you a sense of some of the background information, the demographic data, this is the numbers of the Black MBAs in each class year from 1969. So that was those 5 that formed the African American Student Union, the inspiration for this work. And you can see the efforts that they had. In the next year of Harvard Business School, we had 27 Black graduates in the MBA program. Prior to 1969, there were no more than 2 Black students in any HBS class. In 1969, there were 5. That was the highest number up until that point in the previous 60 or so years. And so you can see how the numbers have trended over time. There's been some peaks and some valleys along the way. One of the things that we see in this data is that over the last 25 years, the number of Black students in the MBA program has stayed steady at 55. And that was actually a revelation for us because I think we hadn't really done a deep dive into our alumni by race in any way. We sort of aggregated all minorities into one category. And this was a way for us to sort of say, okay, we really haven't moved the needle in any way. This was a wake-up call for us. It was a wake-up call for the admissions office to say, hey, we need to do a better job. We've stayed steady and flat at about 55 for the last 25 years. And the mix of that 55 has also changed. So this gives you a sense of over the last 5 decades where the Black MBAs are coming from. And so in 70s, 80s, 94% from the US, and you see that number going down to about 86% in the 2010s. And in the decade that we're in now, it's probably closer to 84%, and a wider group coming from Africa, somewhat relatively flat from the Caribbean and South America. So you can see the distribution of the Black alumni over time. And in terms of the gender composition, actually, Black women have outpaced women overall at HBS since the early 2000s, right now representing about 43 to 44% of the Black MBAs in the class, which is higher than the number of overall women in the class. This actually speaks to the statistics and the data of women in graduate programs in the United States overall. And just a little bit of a background in terms of where they came from. We were interested in what was their path to HBS. And so you can see here the percentage of Black graduates who came from an Ivy League institution, historically Black college or university, or a top 100 national university, as well as other schools across the world. And you can see heavy concentration in elite institutions. So this gets to that earlier point on the path to power. How do you actually get access? How do you get opportunity? A lot of it is being able to go to an Ivy League institution, being able to go to a top 100 institution. So if I were to tell you that the top 10 institutions that have brought MBAs, have brought alumni into the program, Harvard represents 11% of all Black MBAs, and then Howard University in Washington, D.C., Stanford, Yale, Penn, down the line. Number 11 would be Spelman. It's a lot of times people ask me, where's Spelman on the list? Spelman, historically Black college in Atlanta, focused on women. That would be number 11. And so we were interested to see, okay, this looks at this 40-year history, and you can see that there's a high concentration of expectation that graduates are coming from particular types of schools. And so getting into Harvard is actually harder as a person of color. And so you look at this and you say, okay, how has that changed over time? And what we can see is actually it's gotten much more concentrated over time than less concentrated in terms of Ivy Leagues, historically Black colleges, and top 100 liberal arts and national institutions. So you can see this very high concentration of elite experiences. And let me just share with you one perspective from somebody we interviewed.
You look around at the education of Black folks versus white folks. You start to notice a pattern that all the Black folks are superbly educated. The Black folks went to Ivy League schools. The white folks went to possibly whatever schools they wanted to go in. So you start to see that Black folks are screened much more. You have to have accomplished or gone to much better schools to get the same position as a person who's not Black.
So her perspectives represent a number of the women that we spoke to in terms of their expectation of what they needed to do to be able to get into HBS and beyond. What I want to share with you is some of the research on the survey data that we've done. We've been doing a longitudinal survey of MBAs since 2015. We do it every other year. We've just done the most recent survey, and I'm going to share with you some data on enablers and obstacles to success. And this led to the work on paths to power and how particular individuals beat the odds in terms of their access to opportunity. So the first thing I'm going to share with you is satisfaction by race. So this looks at, and here I'm comparing white alumni and Black alumni. And again, Black represents not just US Black citizens, but the global alumni base of Black graduates. And so for women and men here, these are sort of work metrics in terms of satisfaction. How satisfied are you with being able to do meaningful work, your career growth, and professional accomplishments? And as you can see from this particular graph, men are far more satisfied than women on all of these dimensions. That's not a big surprise. We often see that. White women are more satisfied than Black women on all of these dimensions as well. And these are statistically significant differences in terms of satisfaction. That being said, the satisfaction is relatively high. It's not super low, but it does show you the differences in terms of views of the workforce and the work metrics. And then if I look at this from a personal metrics perspective, so your ability to contribute to society, your ability to combine personal and professional life, and your life overall, again, you see differences between men and women, where there is some difference in terms of the satisfaction of men on these versus women, particularly white men, more satisfied in all of them. But some of the same patterns appear here in terms of differential satisfaction. And that plays a role in access to opportunity. And part of the satisfaction is driven by some key enablers to success. And so what I want to do is share with you a couple of different factors of looking at success: job advancement factors, support systems, and work-life balance. And we looked at a number of we probably looked at 20, 25 different factors to try to understand what are the key drivers of success for underrepresented individuals in an organization, and particularly for Black executives. And so I'm just going to focus on the ones that were statistically significant, the ones that were most important. I'm not going to share all of it. But the three that were considered the most important in terms of job advancement and development were these three. So the opportunity to have developmental or visible job assignments, to have significant general or line management experience, and to have a global assignment. So again, we looked at 15 variables, and these three were the most important. Again, what you can see here, what we see on the left side on the experienced is the percentage of alumni that experienced these aspects in their career, these different enablers in their career. And then on the right side, under beneficial, is the percentage of those who actually experienced it and thought it was beneficial. So not a big surprise that if you experience developmental assignments, if you experience general management experience, if you experience a global assignment, you thought it was beneficial. In fact, if you look at the red lines on the right for Black women, they found it most beneficial. They see the greatest value in all of these opportunities. One thing that is a little bit surprising when we look at this data, or maybe it's not totally surprising, is that Black women are much more likely to be given developmental or visible job assignments than they are to be given significant general or line management experience. So sometimes what we see in the United States is corporations get credit, if you will, for putting underrepresented individuals in visible assignments, but does that actually translate into line management, general management experience? It doesn't, according to this, there's far less general management experience than there is visibility within the organization. That's the opposite for white men. So one of the interesting things that I'm looking at in this particular data is to try to understand, do those developmental assignments actually turn into something that is running a large division, that is taking on a stretch assignment, that's pushing the individual forward. The second set of enablers focuses on support systems. And so in here we looked at 4. Formally assigned mentors, mentors who are not formally assigned, so informal mentorship, seeing people like you in an organization, and affirmative action programs. These were all of the 4 that had some significance in them. One of the things that you can see here is that Black men and Black women alumni were much more likely to be part of a formally assigned mentorship program. So we see a lot of organizations focusing on, okay, we're going to have formal mentorship programs within organizations. We're going to take people who are largely underrepresented in the organization and try to provide this support mechanism. Unfortunately, what you see on the right side is that many of the folks that are in those programs don't find it very beneficial. In fact, there's a wide gap between informal versus formal mentorship. Real mentorship comes, a real opportunity comes from these informal connections that people make, these informal opportunities to be able to leverage relationships with people within the organization based on sources of power. So when I talk a lot about this work and I talk to my older white colleagues, they're like, what can I do? Well, you can be a mentor, you can be a supporter, you can sponsor somebody. You don't have to be formally assigned. You can take these opportunities going forward. The other thing that you can see from this particular chart is that Black women tend to see wide benefits of seeing people like them in the organization, even though they're the least likely to be able to see that. And one other sort of final aside on this particular graph is that you can look at the numbers on affirmative action, and you can see that Black men and Black women see opportunities associated, have experienced opportunities associated with affirmative action and see the benefits of those. The thing that I find surprising in this is that white women see themselves not having experienced these and not necessarily seeing the benefit of it. But we know from research that white women are the largest beneficiaries of any affirmative action programs in place. And so it's interesting to see the disconnect there that's going on in this particular data.
We, Black women, need to be doing more networking. We need to lift up our heads from all the work that we are focusing on. We tend not to network, and that is hurting us. We're not spending time to build rapport with the people that are making the decisions about who gets the next job, who gets the big opportunity. They don't know us. They have not heard what we have accomplished.
And so what she's speaking to is what we hear a lot in my research, is that Black executives, in particular Black women, feel that they have to be heads down doing their work. They can't sort of lift up, do networking, engage in these different activities at work because they feel like they're under the microscope and they have to be working harder. In the end, that's a bit of a paradox because that lessens your opportunity for access and opportunity if you're not necessarily doing the networking. The final thing I want to share in terms of enablers is our work accommodations. These are a variety of different job flexibility arrangements, work hour arrangements that organizations have put in place to enable individuals to be able to balance their personal and professional lives. And one of the things that you will notice on this data is that Black women are the least likely to take advantage of any of them. And this speaks to, if you look at none, Black men and Black women are by far more likely not to take advantage of any of these. And in our interviews with Black executives, they've often talked about, look, I don't have the luxury to be able to not work towards a promotion or limit my travel or change the flexibility of my life and my work arrangements because I'm being scrutinized, I'm being analyzed. I don't feel like I have the same latitude as everybody else as I pursue my career. One final thing we looked at in terms of the data, and then I'll share with you some of the senior executive women information, is the impact of gender and race on one's career. And we asked individuals, what did you think the impact of the gender was going to be, your gender was going to be when you left HBS and then looking back on your career? So retrospectively looking back, was it an advantage? Was it a disadvantage, or was it neither? And you can see, Black men and white men largely saw their gender as an advantage or neither. Interesting, there's a small subset of white men who see their gender looking back on their career as a disadvantage. I think this represents some of the backlash against diversity that we've seen come up in some of the political discourse. But Black women and white women largely saw their gender to be a disadvantage and largely experienced it that way. And then in terms of race, similarly, Black men and Black women felt that their race was going to be a disadvantage. Black men didn't experience it as much of a disadvantage, but Black women experienced it the way that they expected coming out. Again, you see a little bit of a difference with white men here. I think that goes to some of the backlash that we've seen about diversity writ large.
I have experienced more discrimination as a woman than as an African American. There may be other experiences of racism, but it was never as overt as sexism. I think being a Black woman, I feel like we're always trying to walk the line of not being too assertive and not coming across angry. Being one of the only Black people, much less Black women, and being as outspoken as I think I am, I always felt pressured to dial it back.
And so what I want to share with you in closing is some of the deep dive that we did into senior executive Black women. This was actually the first research that we did coming out of this focus on the Black experience. And one of the things that we did is we built, as I said, this database, this 1,381 Black alumni over the last 40 years. And what we then did, similar to what Africa.com and their colleagues have done to come up with the list, we went through the screening process to figure out, okay, what was a top executive position? So not just C-level, but managing partner, managing director, looking at the different various roles to see who of our Black graduates, men and women, have reached a top executive position. And what we can see from this particular data, there were 532 Black women who graduated from HBS over the last 40 years, and only 67 made it to the top executive position. So a 13% rate. So we could tell the story of the 87% that don't, and I think some of the data that I have shared previously show some of that information. But we really wanted to understand these 67. So we reached out to all 67 and asked them to share their experience. How did they beat the odds? How did they become one of these individuals who was able to succeed? And one of the things that they told us right off the bat was that I'm an anomaly. There's only one of me, or there's very few of me in the organization. And so I have to navigate this hypervisibility versus invisibility conundrum. On the one side, I'm hypervisible because there's so few of me in the organization that I'm under the microscope. I'm expected to perform at a particular level. All eyes are on me. And so that puts this tremendous pressure on me to represent my race, my gender, et cetera. On the other end, I could be very invisible because there's so few of me that I can fly under the radar. I can get I will be less noticed. I'm not going to get feedback. I'm not going to get opportunities. And so you see these different women navigating this hypervisibility versus invisibility conundrum. And it's interesting. Some women that I spoke to said, look, I'm going to step into the spotlight. If you're going to put me on the microscope, you're going to make me hypervisible, then I'm going to get something. There's going to be a quid pro quo. You want this from me to represent the organization in a particular way, then I want this from you. And other women actually just flew under the radar and said, look, I'm going to be a little bit stealth on this and navigate my career a little bit differently.
When you start with the wind in your sails and the presumption that because you look a certain way and you're a white male, you get to start with credibility. So you get to work away from that. You get to make a few mistakes. I don't have that luxury.
And so what we saw these women talk about in terms of their beating the odds were 4 different things. One was emotional intelligence, one was authenticity, agility, and resilience. With emotional intelligence is with the sense of self-awareness, understanding the context, reading the room, being able to deal with a lot of microaggressions. And I hate putting some of this up here because a lot of this puts the onus on the Black woman to navigate the situation. In reality, that is true. Organizations should be creating the context where people can be more authentic, can step into themselves and not have to deal with this. But in the reality, a lot of the women talked about, I really had to build my emotional intelligence. I had to really build my agility. I had to really understand the dynamics, understand where I could make my move. And so one woman said, look, I used the low expectations to my advantage. I asked to go to senior executive meetings. I absorbed all this information. I soaked it in, and then I used that to my advantage to move up in the organization. And then there was what we've seen is a big change over the years about when do I step into authenticity? When do I get to be my full self? And so I think women from the 70s and 80s, and even the early 90s talked about not feeling necessarily that the organizations were receptive to their stepping into authenticity, and they had to read the cues in the environment to decide when do I step into this particular sense of who I am. And then all of this led to this sense of resilience, this ability to deal with adversity, to be able to push forward, realizing the obstacles that were in their way. And so this was a lot of what the women had to do on their own. And as I speak to organizations about what they can do to create the scaffolding and the infrastructure that actually supports a different environment, it doesn't necessarily rely on the woman to do all of the work to be able to navigate her own success. A number of things are on this slide, but the thing that was most important to these women were the ability to cultivate and develop these mentors and these champions, and not just benign mentorship, right? And so mentorship is, yes, this is how you navigate this organization. They really wanted champions, people who would give them opportunities, who would have their back. We all have inevitable stumbles. Who's going to support you as you stumble? Who's going to give you that frank advice? One of the things that we do know is that Black women and women in general get the least amount of feedback in the organization, the least amount of developmental opportunities, and champions and sponsors are giving them those opportunities, giving those feedback to develop. And so what has changed and what hasn't? So going back to my original motivating questions, not a lot has changed. In fact, our Black MBAs are more like the outsiders than the insiders, even though this is an inside path. There's still a heavy focus on mentorship and sponsorship, a thirst for learning. Our Black graduates are highly educated, have had to go to elite institutions, and there's a heavy focus on resilience. So what I'd like to say is that a lot has changed. In many ways, yes, but in some of the fundamental ways of access and beating the odds, it has not. And so I'm going to stop there. And I'm sorry I went over a little with my time, but happy to take any questions or move forward with the agenda.
Tony, I'm going to moderate the questions for you. And so I will share with you some of the first questions that have come up. One question is out of South Africa. From Fikile, she asks the question, how do historical events play into this? How is it that issues like the social justice movement of the last year, for example, play into the paths of Black women as they go through their journey in corporate world? And what way do these exogenous factors impact?
Yeah, and so you can see that in a couple of ways. You can definitely see that in the 1960s and the 1970s with affirmative action programs and equal opportunity. And you can see organizations doing things, and then it results in an increase of managerial positions, director positions for people of color, but then it sort of wanes. So one of the things that we've seen with this racial awakening and this focus on opportunities. Lots of organizations have said publicly, okay, we're going to do something different. We're going to change the way in which we operate. So there's one thing about bringing people into the organization. And so there's a lot of focus on recruitment, but then the big focus is really on retention. How do you build the scaffolding in the organization? And so the jury's out a little bit right now. I've seen the momentum sustained, and so I'm feeling positive about that. I've been, and my colleagues who are studying race have worked with a number of organizations as they're trying to reconfigure the way in which they navigate the policies within their organizations and the opportunities within organizations. So I see some positive momentum. I hope that it continues. These things ebb and flow with these different inflection points. You see this big push. You could see that in the data on HBS. When we've had directors who are focused on underrepresented minorities in our MBA program, the numbers increase. And then that person leaves, we don't fill it right away. There's less focus on it. You take attention away from that, and then the numbers go down. And so this sustained momentum is going to be really important from these exogenous events.
Great. Tony, we have a question from Pam Reeve, who's one of the women corporate directors. And one of the questions she asks is, does the data indicate the most effective things that white allies can do to be supportive to Black women in their journeys? Some are worried about being patronizing or offending in some way, not truly understanding due to the vast differences in work-life experiences. So what can allies do?
Yeah, so to me, this gets to that point about, this research that looks at who has access to these senior positions, and a lot of senior positions are path dependent, and they're dependent on coaching and development. And what I see with a lot of white senior executives is that they're not giving feedback, they're not getting development advice because they're afraid to be seen as sexist, or they're afraid to be seen as racist, or they're afraid they're going to be clumsy in their feedback. So they don't actually give feedback. They're like, oh, if I say this about this particular person, they're going to take it the wrong way. And by not giving feedback, but who are you giving feedback to, right? You're probably giving feedback to your white colleague. And so what David Thomas talks about is these two tournaments, right? That you have certain white colleagues that you're biased, predisposed to because you feel comfortable with them, you're giving them feedback. Those individuals are having the opportunity to soak in what you've told them and to course correct, where the Black women, you're not. And so they're left adrift and they're trying to wonder what's going on. So I can't stress this enough. So one is give that feedback and do it on a regular basis. And even if it's a little bit clumsy, it's vitally important. The second thing is pay attention to what you're asking the Black women to be doing. So what I often find, particularly in the United States, is the Black women are taking on diversity roles within their organization. They're asked to represent the organization at different events. They're asked to do recruiting. They're asked to doing all of these things that are outside the purview of their job if they're not the chief diversity officer, and most of them aren't. And so are you giving credit for that? Because that means that woman is doing double duty, supporting the work that she has to do for her core job, plus supporting all these other things, which she may be very interested in and wants to support, but that takes away from other aspects of what she's being evaluated on. And so as a developmental manager, are you taking that into account? Are you thinking about that as well in terms of how you're coaching and developing your team?
Well, great. Well, Tony, we're going to have to cut this short because we have so much interest in this topic. Thank you so much for your presentation. One person has asked, can they get access to the study? And if so, how? So let me leave with that question.
So there's two main sources for the work that we've done. One is the Harvard Business School article, Beating the Odds. And the second is the edited volume, Race, Work, and Leadership, New Perspectives on the Black Experience by HBS Publishing, that has a lot of this data as well.
Okay, and is it okay with you if we send this out to all the participants?
Absolutely, yes.
We can do that easily here at Africa.com. We'll take your slides and we will send it out to the list of registrants for this event.
Thank you.